What's up, everybody? Welcome back to our Kratom Addiction and Recovery Daily Devotional series. So yesterday we left off in the book of Exodus, where we're going to be for the next week and a half or so, talking about how God's people were at the point where they had been set free from captivity and they were then led into the wilderness. And people were complaining about how they at least had their needs met when they were still in captivity. And so we really broke down what the wilderness is for us in our addiction and recovery season. And also we left it off talking about how, questioning and wondering about God providing for us and for our needs. So today we're going to pick up with that, in chapter 16, and we're going to be in verses 4 through 13. Then the Lord said, "Look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day you can go out and pick up as much food as you need for that day. I will test you in this to see whether or not you will follow my instructions. On the sixth day you will gather food, and when you prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual." Excuse me again. "By evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints. And I will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning." That evening vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, manna, as fine as frost, blanketed the ground. They had no idea what it was. But then they learned that it was the food that the Lord had set out for them. And it was like white coriander seed and tasted like honey. So I love the story of manna. I love the concept of manna. I love how these verses in this chapter illustrate God's provision and God's faithfulness. In our recovery and even in our addiction season, we're led into the wilderness, which is what we got into yesterday. And the wilderness, for me, what I associate with it is that it's a time of being tested, our faith being tested. It's a time of not knowing how our needs are going to be met, not knowing how long it's going to take for us to feel better in however long our recovery process is going to take. Excuse me again. And so it's a season of unknowing, and that's what the wilderness was for me. So sorry. And so when we're in the wilderness, it's meant to be difficult. Some of us may feel great a week or two after we get off of kratom. I always say that everybody is different, but for me, if you're just joining, you don't really know a lot of my story. If you've been with us, through these devotionals, you've heard a lot of my story, so I apologize if it gets repetitive. But I always like to relate what we're talking about to my personal experience to be able to share that with you. And for me, my recovery process was very long. It lasted for about a year and a half after my final quit for me to get back to the point where I felt like I was at a new normal again. And during this year and a half, I consider that the wilderness for me. That was my wilderness in my recovery process. And during this time, my faith was tested. And not everybody is going to go through that same amount of time. Not everybody is going to feel the way that I did for that same amount of time. But I do believe that the wilderness is essential for any of our recovery processes. Without getting, philosophical, or whatever the right way is to describe this, when we're relating our recovery to the wilderness, to break it down on a scientific level. When we are in recovery after we quit a substance, no matter what it is, our brains and our bodies need time to rewire, because our neurochemicals get used to kratom, or whatever the substance is, providing different, dopamine, serotonin. These are different neurochemicals that are involved when we're using a substance. And when we stop a substance, there's going to be a time that our bodies need to heal. And things like anhedonia, which is the inability to feel pleasure from anything, the inability to feel satisfaction from anything, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, all sorts of things go on when our bodies and our brains are rewiring from these addictions. So that's what the wilderness is on a scientific level. But on this way that we're looking at it today, where we can see in God's word these illustrations of how he was before, and we can know that he is that same way now. And we can look at our addiction and recovery and the wilderness that we go into in our recovery as we can look at these stories in Exodus, like we're saying, as examples of God's faithfulness, and know that he will be faithful with us too. And so for me, what happened in my season of being in the wilderness of recovery was I wasn't able to work at the end of my addiction, especially, and then in the first parts of recovery. It was not possible. It was not physically possible for me to work, or mentally possible for that aspect. And I often didn't know how my needs were going to be met. And without going into too much detail, what happened during this time and how the Lord provided for me was absolutely nothing short of miraculous. And I don't like to, equate God's faithfulness to just money. But you know what? We live in a world where you need money. And the things that happened during my recovery, and how God just blessed me beyond my wildest dreams, it was absolutely amazing. And what was really cool about it was that these blessings would come in my life when I was ready for them. Because if these financial blessings would have happened any sooner, if I was still in my kratom addiction, or I was in the, beginning of my recovery process, I would have not been able to be responsible with the financial blessings that God provided for me. And I know that they happened at the time that they did for a reason. And so I'm sharing a little bit about my situation with you to let you know that, when you're in your wilderness of recovery, God will provide, and he is faithful. But I shared it with you before. I have a lyric in one of my songs that says, "In the wilderness, when it's unsure what's yet to come, you've always provided what I need, not what I want." And so that really sums it up, that, we're not going to get everything that we want in this season of the wilderness, and in our lives in general. We're not going to get everything that we want. What we really want all the time isn't a lot of times what's best for us. So God will provide what we need, though. And sometimes it's not in the form of financial blessings. Sometimes it takes on the form of a person coming into your life, or, you're in need of groceries, or you're in need of, clothing, or whatever it may be. And the Lord will provide in these really unique ways for you. There is also times where we are meant to go without. We are meant to, make do with what we have, and appreciate what we have, especially if there's more that's to come for you, which I believe there's always more to come for all of us. We are meant to value and appreciate and be grateful and thankful for what we have right now. And so, bringing that back to where we're at today in this chapter of Exodus, you know, the Lord, when he brought manna to his people the day before, or excuse me, yesterday when we were talking about this, and the day before, and shortly before, excuse me, his people were complaining about, at least when we were in captivity, we had food to eat. And then the Lord provided for them through the manna that came. And so this is an illustration of God's faithfulness. And it's also, when we think about this, and that the next morning the area around the camp was wet with dew, and when the dew evaporated, manna as fine as frost blanketed the grounds. That's kind of an abstract concept if you think about it, and I've heard this broken down in different like sermons and stuff that I've listened to, where like people really like to break down what manna actually is. And so it can be kind of an abstract way to think about God providing for us. But really what it means and what it symbolizes is, God providing when there's nothing. And bringing this out of the dew of the earth. And so that's a really cool way to think about how when God's people had nothing, quails were covering their camp, and manna was blanketing the ground. And so I know that this could be a little abstract for some of us, but I encourage you today to think about this wherever you are. And what is manna for you? What are your needs right now in the season of the wilderness in your recovery process? If it's financial, if it's food, if it's clothing, if it's somebody, it's having another person to be around. Some of us are alone when we're navigating our recovery and we're going through this wilderness. And what is that? And, God may not provide everything that we want, like I was saying. And it's also a chance for us when we're in these needs to go to the Lord and to really rely on God for our needs, whether they be, financial or whatever it is, like these physical needs that we have, or these spiritual needs as well. If there's nobody that's around you to support you while you're in your recovery process, that's the chance for you to connect with God more. And that what you would want from a person, you really go to the Lord for. And he is faithful. He's not only faithful to provide monetarily and, for these physical needs that we have, but he is faithful in the sense that he's like the best friend that you could ever have. Jesus is the best friend that we could ever have. And so, being able to go to the Lord with our needs and seeking for them to be met by him instead of in the world. So I encourage you to think about this today. And Exodus, like I said, I really love this book. And we get into some hard stuff. And this is hard. Our needs being met is a hard thing. And when we go without, it's a hard thing. When we're already struggling in our recovery and, our needs are not being met, it's a hard thing. And as we move forward in Exodus, there are still some topics that we're going to cover that are going to be hard things. But this is what's good for us. When we're able to look at these hard things and we're able to look at what God is teaching us and what we can draw from these examples in the Word and how we relate them to our own lives and what we can be learning from this and growing into better people is the point of all of this. It's the point of recovery. It's the point of our walk with God, one of the points. But it's all about, being refined and becoming better people, more like God, more recreated, more in his image every single day. And it can be a slow process, but it will still be recreated nonetheless, no matter how long it takes. So these devotionals are all an opportunity to look deeper at these hard things, these challenges, this hard season in the wilderness of recovery and start to think about what it is that we can be learning from these things to move forward better, changed people. So I encourage you to let us know how you're doing in the comments below, and I'll see you next week. This is the last day of the week for our devotionals, and I'll be back on Monday next week as we get into Exodus more. So I hope everybody has a good weekend, and I'll see you in a couple days. Love you guys. Bye.